The future of the city lies in the layers of the past. Nearly 4 years ago, I took the longest plane ride of my life and arrived in the 90-degree heat and humidity of Maputo, Mozambique, the capital of a former Portuguese colony in southern Africa. My first day in Maputo, I spent getting to know the city, walking off my jet lag. I walked from my hotel in the outskirts of the city in a more suburban area where there were houses that looked like Frank Lloyd Wright-inspired designs. I walked down the broken sidewalk, down avenues named after Mao Zedong, Vladimir Lenin, Karl Marx, till I got to the downtown. The downtown was built by the Portuguese in the early 20th century, and it looks like any European city. They're Art Deco theaters, mid-century modern hotels with porthole windows, and modernist housing towers. This was what I was there to see. I was there for 3 weeks to document the city's modern architecture for an exhibition project. On my second day, I decided it was time to start thinking about what it would take to get into some of these archives that I thought would hold some of the answers I wanted to know. So I began navigating the bureaucratic tape to try to get into this building, the Biblioteca Nacional, the National Archive, which held materials dating back 150 years, before Maputo was the capital of this colonial outpost. After nearly a week of trying to get access, I got the needed stamp on my research papers and was let in. I was the sole researcher in this cavernous room and was seated at this tiny table, guarded by one woman, who seemed to be the keeper of the city's entire history. I found some incredible materials. She let me look through disorganized boxes and files of old maps showing the early city layout in the late 19th and early 20th century, of building drawings and plans, of old postcards, and also boxes filled with photos from the 1930s, 40s, 50s, showing this newly built modern city. Well, there was no photocopy or scanner at the archive, and I wasn't allowed to take any photos. So instead, the woman let me leave the National Library with the country's historic patrimony, including a 19th century map, and take it across the street to the local copy shop. This terrified me. I took the materials over there, and the copy shop was so unlike the library. The copy shop was small, it was dirty, it was chaotic, but it was filled with life. So I handed these national treasures over to the woman behind the counter, who seemed quite indifferent by my presence. She took the maps and jammed them into this oversized scanner. She took the photos and put them onto the copier. I suddenly had this feeling that these documents that had survived in a city that had undergone a revolution, that had undergone a 20-year civil war, weren't going to make it back across the street. But then something happened. At some point, the woman saw what I'd given her. She saw that she was looking at images of the city, images of her city, and that changed the entire scene in the copy shop. People were looking at a city that they hadn't seen in decades. Some new arrivals to the city were looking at images of a city they had never seen before. This brought everyone together. The people in the copy shop, the people who had been standing outside the copy shop, everyone was looking at this place, this garden city, this city with a different name, Lorenzo Marquez, a city that people wanted to visit, a city that people wanted to live. In 1975, after independence, Lorenzo Marquez was rechristened as Maputo, and the avenues were named after Marxist leaders and revolutionary figures. These people in the shop, the old-timers, the new-timers, were suddenly looking at an image of a place where you had beautifully tiled sidewalks, a place where there were tree-lined streets, a place for entertainment, for leisure, for swimming, a place unlike the place they knew today. Because after independence, the population of the country grew. There's poverty. There's a gap between the rich and the poor. Today, 54% of the people in Maputo live below the poverty line, and 35% lack access to clean water. They were looking at an ideal city. This is the city today, with its broken tiled sidewalks, with parks, former parks that are now used as dusty parking lots, and buildings that are falling down. But looking at these maps, seeing the layers of the past, inspired people to think. They were in the copy shop talking about what the city had been and talking about what some of the problems were today. And in doing this, there came this sense that the city could be different because it had been different. There's this sense that they weren't trapped in this moment in history, that it's not eternal. And with this came this idea that the seemingly impossible situation of their lives, some of these intractable problems, could in fact be solved. Well, I took those photos and maps back across the street to the Biblioteca, and in all likelihood, they haven't been looked at again. They're inaccessible to most Mozambicans. Many Mozambicans, most of the people involved in the planning process of the city, don't actually live in the city. They don't ride the overcrowded buses, they don't drink the water, they don't listen to the music, they don't wear the clothes. It's done from outside. So what if we were able to take these images and bring them to the street, to project them onto the walls of buildings or hang them from the squares? What if we could continue that conversation that happened in the coffee shop and bring it out and get the whole city involved in this discussion? Moving to what seems like a completely different place, closer to home, this is New York's Hudson Valley. We've gone from the developing world to the developed world. Many people, if you've ridden the train up to the Hudson Valley, it's an incredibly beautiful ride. But just off the train tracks is a different city. These Hudson River cities are undergoing tremendous problems as well. There's poverty, poor school systems, crime. Newburgh, New York, in the 1950s was named by Life magazine as an all-American city. Today, it's touted as the murder capital of New York State. So what happened to the Hudson Valley? This used to be the place of industry. This was where commercial centers were, where people went to shop, where people went to hear music, theater. There were even opera houses there. Part of the problem was urban renewal, national urban renewal policies that were far removed from the local context. People were making decisions without talking to the people, without knowing what they wanted. It was an issue of urban renewals that don't renew and white papers that work better on paper than they do in reality. People in both Maputo and the Hudson Valley are somewhat in similar mindsets in that the people in the developing world, in the Hudson Valley, have this sense that they don't have control of their problems. That, as I mentioned, that there are these urban renewal projects that aren't working, or white papers that aren't helping them get what they want. While people in the developing world feel equally a sense of despair, that they don't have access to education, that they don't have money, that they don't have access, the government structures aren't in place to help their problems solved. What's similar is that people in both places feel trapped by a layer of history. They feel that they can't escape. They don't see that history is fluid, that it's going to change, that it's continually evolving. It's this sense of layers that gives us hope about what could be, about knowing that the cities will change. I've been working on a project in the Hudson Valley for the past few years that's trying to engage people in the planning process. As part of this effort, we're making a documentary film to talk about the issues, and we were first given 3 months to make this film, a seemingly impossible task. So we went out and we interviewed the heads of various organizations, the Chamber of Commerce, tourism bureaus, environmental groups, and we showed our executive producer this rough cut, and she said, quite frankly, sparing no words, "This film is deadly. You have to get out there and interview real people, find out what's really going on in this place." So a 3-month project became a 2-year project. And we met a lot of interesting characters in the process. One story I want to share is a guy we met up in Poughkeepsie, which is a 2-hour train ride north of New York City, Fred. Fred had a dream of converting an old abandoned railroad line into a walkway for pedestrians and bike riders. This was around the time of the High Line, so it was still somewhat a revolutionary idea. People thought Fred was nuts, but he used local history to sell his idea. He talked about what the bridge had been. This was at one time the longest bridge in North America. It carried up to 3,500 cars a day. rail cars carrying pedestrians, carrying freight, carrying circus vehicles and circus animals, milk cars, cars carrying cattle. This bridge was an incredible piece of infrastructure for the area. Fred was able to convince people to let them envision what this bridge had been, so they could again envision what the bridge could be in the future. If you're able to make someone see something, the likelihood of it getting done is that much greater. And in Fred's case, the bridge was opened in 2009 as Walkway over the Hudson. We met a lot of people in the valley whose stories are somewhat similar. They come up with this great idea, everyone thinks they're absolutely nuts, and they're able to frame this in a local history that gets people to see that it might in fact be possible, that a new layer of history can be added to the map. I've been working on a project for the past several months with artist Dana Karwas, because we've been thinking about this importance of local history. So if local history is important to see the place, if it's important to empower people to think about what could be, to get them to imagine and inspire, how do you make local history local? Well, you put it in the palm of their hands. So we're working on coming up with a way to do that. We're working for ways to aggregate information, to take photos, newspaper articles, information that you normally find in museums and archives, information that in Maputo you could only find in the biblioteca, but that information that once put on the street became, in the copy shop, became something that everyone wanted to be a part of. So we've been holding some experimental sessions of bringing together historians and programmers to try to come up with a storytelling algorithm, a way to tell these layers of history. And our project is called Building Block. So what will happen is you'll be able to see a visual timeline of the building's history, to see these layers. And we're going to be calling new news events as well. So the new history will be added on top of the old. And we're working with musicians, artists, planners, designers, so that we have this multi-dimensional layers to the project. That it's not just, here's a static building from 1903, here's the building today, but you're getting a sense of the people who live there, what they wore, what they were reading, what the font of some of the newspapers were in the 1920s. Our design inspiration is based on Sanborn maps, maps made for cities in the late 19th and early 20th century. Beautiful watercolored maps with incredible fonts, but part of the reason we find them so appealing is that these maps made by the Sanborn Company were then leased out. And every few years, people from the Sanborn Company would come and they would update these maps by hand. They would add new buildings on top of the old. So these maps became textured. You could actually see how the city had changed. That's the idea we're trying to pursue in part with Building Block. How can you get people to see these layers of history? How can you make them wonder what came before so they can, again, think about the future? Imagine someone standing on the streets of Maputo and someone standing in the Hudson Valley. Imagine them looking at history, learning from history, being empowered by history, and feeling inspired to design something for the future. What will the future of these cities be? Maybe Maputo is a tree-lined, a newly planted tree-lined street. Or Newburgh is the old Ritz Theater reopening up to show that if a theater can come back, the city can come back. We'll just have to watch and look as new layers are added every day and as people get involved in local history. Thank you.